You should never judge a book by its cover. Anyway, I'm very pleased to say that the Unscrambled channel had a great pleasure in having a hangout with Brian Foerster and Maria Wheatley. These are their channels on YouTube. Maria is into many things. There's some of her videos, and there are other channels and places where you can find her work, her talks. She's written books, she does readings. And then we have Brian Foerster, who's not only into pyramids, metholithic sites.
Hi, this is Brian Foerster, and yesterday I showed you an elongated skull from Paracas, Peru, and that went over quite well, so I thought I would show you another one and give you more information again about the DNA results that we have received so far. So this is the one that I showed yesterday, and it is probably about a 8 or 9 year old female that died approximately 2,000 years ago. This is actually an exact copy of an elongated skull made by Joe Taylor in the United States. So this is not a real skull. This is an exact copy of a young, well, 8-year-old child. So today I'd like to show you this one. This, I believe, is one of the classic natural elongated skulls of Paracas, Peru. Natural meaning that I believe that this individual was born with an elongated skull. Later ones, or later in time, the Paracas bred with normal looking Homo sapiens sapiens here on the coast of Peru, and over the course of time, the genetics of the normal skull began to take over, and that is why head binding or cranial deformation took place.
Just to show you, this is where this bit of filming comes from. We arranged to have the hangout, and then we got some technical difficulties, which there always has to be. And anyway, we ended up starting this hangout, which I'm going to put on first, with Brian waiting for Maria with the technical difficulties that we got. And then the rest of the hangout, where Maria joins us, is one we've just had, and that was what the hangout was supposed to be. So Brian just told us a bit more about the elongated people, and then we go into the hangout which was originally scheduled. Anyway, it's just loads of information, and I hope you really enjoy. And something happened when we were together, so yeah, really nice. You'll see as the hangout happens. Anyway, let's watch. They're not really that far from each other. I mean, most people have heard about Stonehenge, but a lot of people won't have heard about Avebury. Okay, so that's mentioned in the hangout, so that's why I'm going to put a bit of it in to show you, because I've been there. We think we know everything. I'm just going to put a bit of Silbury Hill in and Avebury, because in this hangout we're talking about them, and I've been there to these places. Now this was very strange, because when we were at the car park, the pyramid looked bigger than when we were at the fence. With our naked eyes we could see it, and also with our cameras. So this is being filmed a long way in. But when you get back to the car park, it's huge. But when you get to the fence, the pyramid is still a distance the other side of the fence. I not mean miles, I mean so many feet, but it's still across a field, and it's that big across the field. But when you're standing that bit further back from it, it's grown in size. Do we ever really know what we're living in and what all this is? It's smaller there. Anyway, going to add music to this, and this is a little bit of Silbury Hills, so you get an idea in this hangout when these places are mentioned.
Hi everyone. Hi Brian. Hi Karen.
Well, I would say, God, there's so many things we went to see, but a highlight would have been going to Egypt again, and we got to go down into the Osiris Shaft, which has only been opened for, I think, 2.5 years to the public. So you get to go 200 feet under the Giza Plateau. And that was really interesting. And then we also went to a location near the Giza, or actually on the Giza Plateau, which is the supposed workers' village for the workers who built the Great Pyramid. And that was quite comical because the workmanship at the workers' village was very, very poor, and how they could possibly have been responsible for building the Great Pyramid doesn't make any sense whatsoever. So looking forward to going back once again to Egypt in March of next year. And then right after that, we're going to be going to Israel for the first time. No, just ever since I was a little kid, I've been fascinated by enigmas and ancient places, especially growing up in Canada that doesn't have any ancient places. And so my first trip to Stonehenge in person was when I was 16. There wasn't a fence around it at the time. And I was there with a friend of mine. It's like 5 o'clock in the afternoon. We had to take a bus and then we had to walk to get there, and nobody was there. And it's just incredible. You know, that was my first real megalithic site, and that was quite incredible. And then I got my degree in science, and so having a scientific perspective, I started to study these places from a scientific point of view, and started to figure out that a lot of what archaeology was talking about was not the full picture, and that a lot of these sites are much, much older than we've been taught, including when I went last September with Maria Wheatley, who was supposed to be on the show today. We got to go inside, which only 40 people a day are allowed, and we got to go right up close to the stones, and she described to me the actual timeline of Stonehenge, and her description made much more sense than what most archaeologists say. So she believes Stonehenge is 12,000 years old, which I agree with, and that it was a series of 2 perfect concentric circles, which from an astronomical point of view also makes a lot of sense. The way that it's set up now, I think is kind of illogical. So it looks clearly like it was destroyed at least once, if not several times. Well, subspecies of human, that's where we're currently at. It might actually be a separate species, is what the latest DNA is saying. And no, okay, well, yeah, the elongated headed people of the coast of Peru are becoming more and more fascinating. The latest DNA results are showing that they were a subspecies of human, as in Homo sapiens paracus, or possibly even a separate species. So no academic is touching that with a 10-foot pole, but that's okay, because the way that information is disseminated now is through the internet, not necessarily through academic study. Well, I'm the only one on the ground, so I'm the one basically at the center of the study, but fortunately, I'm working with a group from the US that's financing the whole thing, and they're working very closely with one of the major DNA laboratories in the United States. And so that, you know, it's coming, you know, it's a slow process, but it's a more or less a never-ending process. It's not like you get results and you say, okay, this is what we have. It's like, okay, this is what we have now. Let's do some more study, and then you get more data. The more data that you have, the better. Well, again, it's an ongoing process, and our group is the only one doing it. So, you know, that's how it goes. But no, they're just basically, the academics are trying to ignore it as much as possible. And even our head archaeologist in Peru, who's in charge of the study, is now claiming that all of the samples were contaminated. And he wasn't even there to see the process. So I think he's backpedaling because he wants to distance himself from it. Yeah, it does. It changes the whole complexity of the human species as well. Well, I can actually read to you the latest results. There was a Canadian lab that was also doing some testing, and they keep saying, they've had the samples for 6 or 7 months, and they keep saying that that there wasn't enough DNA to get a proper sample, whereas the laboratory in the US got, I think, 1 terabyte of information so far. And so what the latest message is that the mitochondrial DNA in the Paracas remains shows a high degree of divergence from consensus Homo sapien mitochondrial DNA. It is not as much divergence as is observed in known sister species such as Homo neanderthalensis and Homo denisova, implying the mother was human, albeit with a high degree of divergence from most extant human populations. And then we're working on the paternal DNA, and the lab says the haplogroup of the Y chromosome could not be determined. The Paracas nuclear DNA had a very low alignment with any of the markers that are used to resolve Y chromosome haplodata. In one of the samples, out of 30 million sequences tested, only 1% aligned to known human sequences. The latter result, well, it's getting pretty bizarre. So this latter result of the Y chromosome is suggestive. It implies that the father was not human. So that's where we're at the moment. Well, I guess 10 years of study is showing is that the original Paracas people were born with elongated skulls, and then over the course of time, they mated with normal-looking humans, resulting in, over the generations, that head binding began in order to be able to distinguish the nobility from the common people. So that's kind of the transition. And then that took place over the course of probably 800 years. And then we have the introduction of what are called more famous Nazca people, who were responsible for some of the Nazca lines. And then they basically genocided the royal Paracas population. So the elongated skulls suddenly disappear around the year 100 AD. Yeah, in order to take over their land.
Hey, we eventually got here. Anyway, very nice to say that on this hangout today, we've got our Patricia, we've got Brian Foerster and Maria Wheatley, but we've had to do Maria through the phone because we've had a few technical hitches, but we're here. Anyway, hello everybody.
Hello.
Hi. Hello.
Hey, there's Patricia. So, it's really nice of you that you joined us today, and we started talking a little bit last week, but Brian wanted to wait for you, Maria.
Thank you, Brian.
Oh, my pleasure.
It is. And you had, it was your suggestion really, Maria, wasn't it? About what you wanted to talk about today.
What was that, sorry, Karen?
It was your idea about what you wanted to talk about today, the energies?
Yeah, I thought, well, if that's what we'd like to discuss, it's always good talking about earth energies and sacred sites and, our personal experiences and that type of thing.
So, what would you like to say to Brian then? Because didn't you do some of this with him anyway?
Well, at Contact in the Desert, which was in June of this year, I gave Brian some Dowsing rods they're quite good ones actually, and they can be used to detect where different types of earth energies are and different kind of patterns that the earth energies emit through the geology upon which they're sited, whether that's like underground water or different types of earth energy. So that's what I kind of do with my dowsing rods. I look for the different types of patterns and energies that flow through ancient sites. And then once you kind of understand the energies, then you can begin to possibly understand how the monuments were being used.
Yeah. And was it new to you, Brian? You hadn't done it before or something?
Well, actually, I know that I'm sensitive to it because when I was 8 years old, no, I guess 11 years old, my parents bought a piece of property. And my mom, who's was very strongly Celtic in her ancestry, decided to hire what local people called a water witch, which was actually a local farmer, and he came to see if we could dig a well on the property. And he had, of course, the normal Y-shaped piece of, I think, hickory or something that he used, and then he also had just a straight piece of wood. And as it bounced up and down by itself or moved up and down, it actually told him the depth. And so I was fascinated by seeing this, and so he said, "Do you want to try?" And I said, "Yeah, okay." And as soon as I held on to them, the stick went it shot straight down into the ground, and then it was overcast, and so it started to move up and down and up and down. I could feel the energy going through my body, so I guess I'm naturally sensitive to it.
I must admit, one of the first videos I actually saw of Marie Wheatley was her actually at Avebury doing the dowsing rod with those Australian people.
That's right. I mean, I think, it's very natural for mankind to find water, and I've done, quite a bit of well boring in my, well, not actually born the well, but finding the water, and then it's well bored. And I do feel, mankind has been using that for many, many thousands of years. And one master dowser for America, for example, called Elongated, he noticed that, well, he claims that he saw in an Algerian cave a dowsing lesson being given using particular types of wood that Brian is describing. I mean, in the British Isles, you use hazel or willow to find underground water as the traditional method. But I think we're very, very sensitive to that underground water, and then we can become sensitive to different types of energies as well.
So when you're using those dowsing rods, you feel the energies anyway, but you were showing it how they were moving when you were actually going up and down the stones.
Yes, I mean, that's the thing. Dowsing is, 3 key skills. It's information dowsing, that's asking your rod a question: is there any underground water in this vicinity, for example? And then the second dowsing principle is called directional dowsing, and that's getting your dowsing rod to show you the direction of a given target. Let's say that's an underground stream. And then the third discipline is tracking and following your rod till it goes to found. So that's the kind of key principles that you have. And once you master those 3 principles, in theory, you can douse for anything.
It's quite sort of simple then, really, in a way.
With a little bit of training, it is very simple, and then you can go on to experience different types of energy, some of which are toxic earth energies that we need to avoid, and some are very benign and healing, which we should interact with.
It's amazing that in a sense it sounds primitive, doesn't it? But in one other way, it must have been magnificent if they can find water like that. But yeah, do you know what I mean? Like they found water like that. How did they know how to do that?
Well, that's why I think it's an extension of our 6th sense, or, our higher self, whatever you want to call that. And then we kind of train ourselves to, be very accurate at that which we find. And one of the, real disciplines of dowsing was done by the Third Reich, actually, under Himmler. In my family archives, I've got a really good photograph of, it's a clipping, actually, from a newspaper of Hitler congratulating Himmler on his dowsing academy. Because what they wanted to find out was what really makes dowsing work, and they claimed to have found it until the Allies burnt the academy down when they approached Germany and conquered it.
We were far. I also think with what you're saying as well is we were far more advanced before than we are now. Far past.
Yes.
You agree with that, don't you, Brian? I mean, with what you're doing.
I believe so. We're becoming so dependent upon technology now that especially younger generations, I think, are going to be on many levels in trouble if they have this continued dependence on having their cell phone glued to their hand. So yeah, we see obviously in the ancient sites, and that's what people like Maria and I and others are working on is decoding what the original use and function of these places were. And the more we study, the more esoteric and fascinating the whole thing becomes.
I mean, you two are quite good friends anyway, aren't you? You came to stay here, and last year with Maria, and also you have so many bits that you're doing kind of together and separate, aren't you? Like the elongated headed people and stuff like that. Maria's found some over here, and you're very interested in it. I mean, it's all quite amazing, isn't it? Even that part of it, as well as the rest.
Yeah, we're developing a really good network of people. Both Maria and I are working with Patricia Awian, who, of course, is based in Egypt. And Maria, I've been talking to Patricia, and we would like to invite you for March of 2021 to do an Egypt tour with us.
Wow, well, thank you very much indeed. That will be an absolute delight.
This tour is that 90% of it will be on the Nile.
Well, that sounds incredible.
I think this is why Brian wanted to wait to talk to you and wanted you to be on the hangout.
It's part of it. It's just that any of these studies, you have to keep altering your approach as to how you look at ancient places like Egypt. And so my general focus has been the megalithic stuff, and how was it done, what kind of technology was involved, etc. But through working with Patricia, who's more on the metaphysical side, Patricia Awian. So she's much more into the metaphysics and earth energies, which of course are obviously aspects of what was going on in terms of the functioning of the places. And so I'm learning from her, and I just thought it would be a great idea to have Maria and Patricia and I and our guests together to be able to look more into that area, because that's relatively new for me, and we're going to be able to see sites which are rarely visited, such as Amarna, which is where Akhenaten's capital city is, because it's right on the Nile, but it's hard to access by road. But if we started Aswan at the beginning of the tour and simply cruise down the Nile for 8 to 10 days, then we can stop at places like Amarna and other out-of-the-way ancient places. And of course, will make the tour very special for the people who want to come and attend.
Well, it does sound fascinating, and I think Brian is correct in by getting people from different disciplines together with different backgrounds and different understandings, and perhaps even different perceptions, and then by kind of having a holistic approach about something, people learn from one another, and that's what mankind has been doing, for thousands of years. So I do hope that I can add, as I'm sure I will, that different perception where we can all delve in and try to unsolve a mystery, because this is why I know I got interested in megalithic sites, because I wanted to find out what was going on, in the ancient world, and I feel that if we do kind of unravel and understand to a certain degree what was happening in the past, I really do feel it can influence our future. So I think the past is very relevant for a modern generation.
We're saying all this though, but you and I know that there's a pyramid up the road, and nobody around here wants to admit it's a pyramid. So how do you, Brian, I know, as I said before he came online, that for some reason he manages to get everywhere and he doesn't seem to be stopped, and it's really great that he's able to get and do what he does, but they don't even admit that Silbury Hill's a pyramid.
But then you're up against an establishment that was really kind of ingrained with Professor Richard Atkinson in the 1950s, who was, one of the first people to really publicize Silbury Hill. And they come from an old school. And I know you know John Cowie very well, and he's been on this show before, and he's even done his own carbon dating on Silbury Hill, which came to 12,000 BC, wasn't it? Not 2,400 BC of the recent carbon dating. So we are challenged, but that said, there's people that are interested in earth energies, from architects. I've been training architects in Italy to look at new builds and interpret what they're going to build upon dictated by the earth energies, because some earth energies, for example, are very good at giving you energy. So that would be a particularly good place, to recuperate in a hospital, for example. So as much as we're up against it to a certain degree with the old school establishment, I think that, just by being who we are and doing what we do, we can dissolve the old and bring in the new.
Yes, I agree. Don't you, Brian?
Well, definitely, and that's why, as Maria has stated, and that's what I've been involved with for quite a long time, is a multidisciplinary approach. Because in the beginning, when we would do tours, we'd have very famous authors come with us, and that's okay for a while. But then bringing people who aren't as well known to the global public, I think, is far more important. And people like Maria and Patricia Aoyan deserve to have much more exposure to, to the world, and that's why the best way to do that. I mean, something like Contact in the Desert is fun because it attracts 5,000, 6,000 people for 3 days, but it's the field work which is fascinating, and I'm in a position where I have to be every time I go to an ancient site, I have to be in the frame of mind where I really want to be there, and I really am respectful and ask for more information to be given to me so I can share it. That's why I restrict the number of tours I do in Peru to basically 3 a year, because I don't want to have the feeling that I'm simply doing it, for the money. If I'm not learning, then it's pointless for me to go back to these places. But obviously, I haven't decoded all of it, and it's a lifetime pursuit of walking up a giant staircase. So that's why Patricia Aoyan and I discussed that each time we do the Egypt tour, which is once a year, we want to alter the hosts who are involved in it so that there's a new injection. And it just obviously came to mind that the earth energy aspect has not been done that much in Egypt, and so that's why we thought, well, Maria would be a great addition to the team. And of course, we'll also have our geologist Susan Moore, who is a scientist, but she's also getting more involved in the earth energy aspects as well. So the group of 4 of us, I think, will be a wonderful team to have open discussion, and also, have a number of guests along with us from various disciplines. We usually wind up with a geologist and or an engineer and or a physicist and a medical doctor, and so they all have their input that they can add to the mix.
Well, really pleased for you, Maria.
Thank you, Karen.
It's great.
Thank you, Brian.
Communication and people and coming together is the way forward.
Well, that's it, and I think, it is about understanding things from different angles and looking at something afresh sometimes as well. And Brian and, Patricia, very knowledgeable woman, actually, really so when it comes to ancient Egypt. I feel, compared to them, a little bit of a newbie with ancient Egypt, but the times I have been there recently, and with the kind of knowledge that I've had with other ancient sites worldwide, I'm beginning to really understand the different types of energy. Because even after Contact in the Desert, I decided to go on a road trip with a very dear friend of mine, actually, and we went to some ancient sites outside of Sedona, because obviously Sedona is a bit of a magnet. So we went to places like Elongated and Wheatley and Dowsing. And just by interacting with the earth energies from those sites, you start to realize that different cultures around the world integrated energies in a different way. There's some similarities, like it's a design canon worldwide, but how particular cultures used it, it's quite fascinating. And I think by going to different places and trying to unfold and relate to the sites, then we learn more wherever we go. So my trip to America was, indeed such a pleasure.
Yeah, and then you find out really that what you thought you don't know nothing as what you thought you know, what you thought you knew.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I mean, like you're changing history, aren't you? Really?
Well, I'd certainly add in to it, because like I say, like I said earlier, it's an old school, and we're trying to be the new school of wisdom to a certain degree.
What about your like elongated headed bit though as well? The elongated headed people. When Brian was on last time, he was explaining that they're not human. Well, they're not human as us.
Well, exactly. I mean, we've got to find out, the history of the past and rewrite it.
And look what you're uncovering now. It's almost like it wasn't there and then it's there. Do you know what I mean? Like the elongated headed people, for instance. It's like they're not there and then they are there. Strange, isn't it? If you know what I mean. Do you know what I mean? For people like me, I mean. They didn't enter into my head at all, but you've been following them for years. I'm saying it to Brian as well, both of you.
Oh, okay. Well, it's like what Maria was saying earlier. You have the establishment who are, on some levels, relatively pig-headed in terms of what they will accept, and for a lot of them, they won't accept the new scientific data that's coming out. So that's why I more or less just disregard, I don't work with them anymore because their minds are very closed. And I think it's a generational thing that will disappear over the course of the next 10 or 20 years. And the future and even the present belong to independent researchers, because we don't have an institution that we have to get permission from, and it's through this multidisciplinary approach that that you start to develop the full picture. It's just important at an ancient site as regards what you feel there as it is for the actual scientific data. You need both. You need the left and right hemispheres of the brain working in tandem with each other in order to uncode this stuff, because the places are so complex that really that's the only way. And Maria, I had the great pleasure of being inside the Stonehenge circle, which I will never forget, thanks to Maria's very hard work to allow us to get permission to be inside. And the stuff I learned in that 2 or 3 hour time period was absolutely mind-blowing, because what Maria said in terms of the independent dating of it and its original construction is completely logical, and also like a penny drops in your subconscious where it says, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So, and then, well, yeah, or fallen over, or the fact that you're forced to walk counterclockwise around them rather than clockwise. The fact that there's lichen growing on them, which deadens the energy of them. Just the whole military presence there, and the control, and the giant visitor center, which is more important a place to go than the stones themselves. And that's relatively commonplace now at many.
Don't you think it's really strange that up the road there's Silbury Hill and all the things that are around it, like the other things, the long barrows, etc., etc. Strawberry Hill, isn't it? There's something there, like there's things in the ground, and then there's the Merlin's Mound in Marlborough, and nobody's watching them or protecting them or anything like that.
Point is that it's up to independent research from now on to get to the bottom of this stuff, and that's what we're doing. That's why I very much enjoy my relationship with Maria and also Patricia Ariane, and my local people here in Peru in the highlands who are wisdom keepers and that kind of thing, because it's like you're putting a quilt back together, but different people have to come to you with different threads for you to be able to weave it back together. And yeah, so I think it's working very well for all of us, and that's why field work together is profoundly important.
Can you hear me now?
Oh yes, there you are. Whew.
Yeah, the signal comes and goes here. That's a little bit of a problem, so I apologise profusely for that. But I did hear what Brian said up until about a few seconds ago, and I heard you mention about Merlin's Man. But even with sites like Stonehenge, we have to visualize that Stonehenge was a part of a massive, massive, massive ceremonial landscape. And back in the Bronze Age, from about 2500 BC, using Orthodox dating, it was surrounded by 2 concentric circles of about 800 round barrows. Yeah. Now, all of those round barrows would be gleaming. You're seeing the remnants of a landscape. Did you hear me say that, Karen? That Stonehenge is surrounded by about 800 round barrows.
Wow.
Yeah.
In 2 concentric circles. Now, they would have been gleaming chalk white, and to the visible eye, there's about 800 visible stars. So scholars, going back to antiquarian times, even noticed this. And of course, with modern day agriculture, unfortunately, a lot of those barrows simply got ploughed out. And the same is quite true of Avebury Henge, which is, like Karen said, 17 miles further to the north of Stonehenge, and that too was surrounded by 2 circular rings of Bronze Age round barrows. So they would have been kind of extended out. You're thinking now 5 miles away there would be two large circles of barrows, some of which contained burials, others did not.
Also, I asked you something when you came on a hangout, and basically I think it was, what was the biggest stone circle? And you said it is Silbury Hill now, but it didn't used to be. Oh, sorry, Avebury. But it didn't used to be that there was a much bigger one that used to join in. It's all broken and smashed up now.
Well, no, Avebury is the actual largest known stone circle in the world, but there has been reports of antiquarians of circles up towards the north that could have been bigger, but there's no documented archaeological evidence of that. So again, it's kind of trying to join the dots. You kind of want to have the archaeological evidence, but then if you research the antiquarians, they saw the landscape a little bit different than you and I did. For example, they saw it in a more pristine condition. But to date, Avebury Henge is the largest stone circle. Then Stanton Drew in Somerset, a beautiful stone circle of pink quartz, like material. It's beautiful pink. It's the second largest stone circle.
But back to your dowsing with that Australian person, most of us just go, oh look, they're great stones, but they're stones. But the stones have different layers in them. And that's what your dowsing rods were picking up, weren't they?
Well, dowsing, when it comes to stone or structure, it doesn't have to just be a standing stone. It could be a structure, for example, will behave in particular ways by the shape of it, whether it's a circle or a pyramid or a standing stone. When you come to a standing stone, for example, it's rooted not into the earth in the Wessex landscape, which is the landscape that contains Avebury and Stonehenge, is in the chalk bedrock. So that's why they've stayed up for so long, because they're not in the earth. And they have like different layers to them, energy bands as they're called, Karen, which then can give off a Hertz frequency signal, which was picked up when I doused these so-called energy bands, and there's 7, which I've always likened to megalithic chakras. When I called Rodney Hale one day to say, can you come and record the frequencies or see if they can exist? And he's worked a lot with Andy Collins, for example, a very famous author in his own right, and a very thorough researcher. And Rodney Hale came with me, and he recorded exactly where I was dowsing and found that they were emitting a Hertz signal there, and only at the place where those dowsing rods reacted very strongly. And we also looked at earth currents, for example, and you couldn't do it now at Avebury. No way, because it's becoming a little bit more commercial. But, going back about 10 years, Rodney made these massive copper probes that could go down into the ground. And I said to him, could we, look into the point where a male earth current is with a female earth current. I thought that would be a good idea. But unfortunately, it blew the equipment about 3 or 4 times. So Rodney suggested we go to another place where the frequency was a little bit more quieter and where it was just one earth current coming in, not 2. And again, he recorded frequencies coming out of the earth, and we did a control. Rodney wasn't supporting me. He was just looking at the research, looking for anomalies, and saying, you know, we're trying and kind of understand what's going on. So to a certain degree, we know these earth currents exist. We're just trying to find out how the ancients used them.
We're looking at all the wrong things now, aren't we? Because obviously we use the sky. There's just so much that we don't anymore. We just get our phones out, or we look at the screen, or we get information from something else. But we used to do it ourselves. Did you say that ley lines are man-made, or a lot of them are, or can be?
According to one of the top geomancers of the British Isles, called John Michell, he suggested that some leys could be man-made because they're orientated to a particular solar or lunar event, and that cannot be happy chance. So, for example, one of the longest leys in the UK that John Michell discovered is called the St. Michael Ley. And he noticed that Avebury Henge was the exact centre, and that ley points to the Beltane, and that's the May the 1st sunrise, and the Samhain, the Halloween sunset, and he said that cannot be happy chance. So according to past researchers, that they have looked into particular very powerful major ley lines and said they're orientated to a particular event that has been manipulated by ancient man.
And do you feel that there's a connection between, Brian, as well? Do you think there's a connection between Silbury Hill and the pyramids in Egypt?
Gee, I don't know. This construction technique, of course, is completely different. So I'm just now. Well, according to the carbon dating, it sounds like Silbury Hill's at least 12,000 years old, and I think the pyramids in Egypt are pre-dynastic. So I think they're probably 12, around the same number. We tend to be looking, as Maria was saying earlier, and actually when I was spending time with her in England, everything seems to be dated at 4,500 years old, no matter where you look. It's like this fixed date that they can't actually put any scientific evidence to. And so what we're looking at is the period called the Younger Dryas, when there was a series of cataclysmic events that happened on the planet over the course of 1,000 years. And so basically what I call things, they're either pre-cataclysmic or post-cataclysmic. And I think the major sites in Egypt are pre-cataclysmic and were found by the dynastic people and renamed, etc. And it looks like some of the sites in England as well are of that same vintage.
Do you feel the same, Maria?
Well, yes. I mean, I really do feel that we're on the verge of a new history. And it's a very exciting time if you're an alternative researcher or even a young archaeologist, because people are questioning that which was and what has been previously said, and are looking at the evidence and looking at the sites from a new angle. So when it comes to dating, carbon dating is very problematic anyway. It's problematic because of worms, and this was known by Charles Darwin when he looked at Stonehenge. Why worms? That sounds kind of nutty in a way. But when an experiment was done by archaeologists for carbon dating, they used a see-through fish tank and they put worms in it because they suspected that worms could move artifacts up and down layers. Okay, now when you're looking at layers, if we go down a meter in the Wessex landscape of which I live near Avebury and Stonehenge, you'll hit the Roman era. And if you go down further and further, you'll hit the Neolithic and the Bronze Age, etc. So what they did, they put a dead rat on the top of bones, and they just waited, and they videoed it, and they watched. And they realized that those worms could take bones and then move them down and make them much older, it would make them look like they were from the Neolithic period. At the same time, some other worms could move them up the layering. So even Oxford and Cambridge know that carbon dating can be very, very problematic. So when we look to what the archaeologists are doing, we have to question, is that a correct date? And it is in the archaeological model from Oxford that you choose the younger date anyway. So you could have two pieces of carbon. That's the holy grail for archaeologists. And they could find two pieces, and one could be 8,000 BC, one could be 2,500 BC, and it's their policy to choose the younger date. The whole thing is a nonsense.
Because we don't even, like, do you have what you think is where these elongated headed people were here then?
Well, again, we have a yardstick, and that yardstick is said to be the Neolithic period, which in the UK would be, from about 4,000 BC up until what's called the Copper Age, which would be about 2,500 BC, and then you get a different kind of ages. So we're using that. But when it comes to the long barrows and dating, they go on artifacts. Now, we have to remember that these were open ceremonial places, long barracks, and the final use was put in the skulls and the long bones, and sometimes a flexed skeleton therein. So, they look for different types of flint usage and things like that, but who's to say that wasn't put in much, much, much later? Again, we just need to be very open-minded and think out of the box. And think what was going on at these ancient sites. What were their phases? Was it phase one? They were used for one thing, and then used for burial as a second thing. And I think a lot of the younger archaeologists are thinking along those lines. Thankfully so.
Can I ask you something then? Both of you, Brian and Maria. Maybe I sound stupid, but if you have to dig so far down, what happened to us if we're up here? Because obviously, we've got sort of proof from, say, the 1800s to here that we haven't had a great big layer of dust and land because we're still living on the same bit. So how could there be such a difference of earth between then and now then? Do you understand what I mean? If you've got to dig down to get to these places, why have we built on top? What must have happened for us to have built on top of this?
You get a lot of natural debris that falls. I mean, if you're in a tree environment, for example, let's say you're in a wood, you're going to get much deeper layering system because the organic material falling from the trees and the bark and the dead, flora and fauna, they're going to be producing a layer. So it depends really. I mean, with wind factors, you've got to factor a lot of climatic influences in to understand the depth and method. But there is a depth and method used in the Wessex region.
Do you feel the same, Brian?
Oh, gee, I honestly don't know. Maria's, I think, more of an expert about that than I am.
I just suddenly thought that why do we have to dig so far down then? Also, like, for people who don't know, is it true, just for people who don't know, that a pyramid is the same underneath the shape really as it is on top? You know what I mean? It's like a diamond then. Is it like that or is it not?
No. Well, it depends. The problem is with the term pyramid, which has been, in my opinion, bad. It's a term that's been badly misused because they talk about pyramids in Mexico and pyramids in China and pyramids in Egypt and all over the place. And if you get to the actual definition of where the term pyramid comes from, it's a Greek word, or actually we get it from Greek. And the Greek term was actually pyromedos, which means the fire within or the fire in the middle. And that's when the Greeks entered Egypt and they saw the giant structures at Giza. They said, "What do you call those?" And the Egyptians said that those are called perneters, which means house of nature. So the Greeks reinterpreted that as meaning the fire within, and so that's where they get they use the term pyramidos, from which we get pyramids. So that, to me, defines the ones that we find, the main ones we find in Egypt, but the ones in Mexico or Indonesia or whatever are I think pyramidal structures. They're of a pyramid shape, but they not necessarily of the same exact function, because the ones that in Egypt are technically phenomenal, whereas some so-called pyramids that people describe can be simply mounds of earth, which is very different energetically, like Olmec, so-called Olmec pyramids, which are literally hills of mud or hills of dirt. So that's very different from something which is on the Giza Plateau, which is composed of 2.5 million multi-ton blocks that interlock with one another.
Yeah, because Silbury Hill's not like that, is it? It's
chalk, isn't it?
chalk. Yeah, actually, I lived in Inkpen, and that's, do you know where I mean, Maria? Coombe Hill, and that's had an old settlement up there, and that's the biggest chalk hill in England. There, is she there, Maria?
After Hungerford?
Oh, there you go. She's there. Do you know where Coombe Hill is? Inkpen.
Near Newbury.
It's Inkpen. I mean, there's history there. They used to hang people up there, so there's a hangman's noose up there. It's great for star watching because you're quite high. It's like going up in an aeroplane. Within a few minutes, like you're up on the top of this hill and you can see counties. And it's also on the edge of Wiltshire and Hampshire, and you can sort of see, well, you could see the Didcot Towers, and then they used to parachute off it in the Second World War with open parachutes because it's that high, because it's high for here. And then the women's glider team are around the corner, and they paraglide and whatever it is, parachute off there now today, off the side of it. And then, of course, it's got this ancient settlement on the top. And also the planes for Heathrow line up on it. Would you believe they start their descent from that hill? But it's just got so much history.
Gosh.
And also it's part of the Ridgeway Walk.
Well, Ridgeway's ancient Mesolithic roadways that were created, long before the Neolithic period, Karen, and the reason why they're up on high is because the geology over, millennia, thousands of years changes. And if you go back to the Mesolithic period, then they used the ridgeways because the lowlands were very swampy.
Right, yeah. Also, I don't know about Brian and like where he is or whether they're around any of the pyramids, but there's a lot of white horses and chalk horses around that area as well, which actually are much better seen from the sky.
Weren't they actually originally dragons?
Ooh, what do you say to that, Maria?
Sorry, I didn't hear that.
Sorry, the white horses. I was just saying there's a lot of white horses, chalk horses in the hills in sort of Wiltshire, but we're on the edge of it, so there's one near Oxford, isn't there? That's the oldest one, and that's in Berkshire, but it's around Berkshire and Wiltshire, all these white horses, which are better to be seen from the sky. And then Brian just said, weren't they dragons?
Well, when it comes to the Uffington White Horse, it has been debated for many, many centuries, actually, that it was originally a dragon. And and it's quite strange, really, because one of the earliest depictions from an antiquarian showed it to be quite, excuse me, quite feline.
Dropped off then. I'll just call her back. I'd never heard of that before, Brian.
I think it was actually Maria's idea that she told me.
It's amazing then if, they managed to stay when so much of our history's buried.
Well, that's true.
Oh, she's dropped off. We'll try a couple of more times, but I suppose we've been going for 45 minutes, and it's been action-packed in that 45 minutes.
That's true.
It was very nice of you to ask Maria Wheatley the way you did. That was lovely.
Oh, my pleasure.
A bit longer. Is there anything, Brian, is there anything you want to say?
Basically that I'm heading off to Turkey in a couple of days for the first time, which will be which will be interesting. So I get to go see Göbekli Tepe and Cappadocia and Derinkuyu and Mount Nemrut and stuff like that. So that'll be fun.
I like Turkey. So I think I told you last time I've been there quite a few times. It's nice there. Anyway, anything you want to say, Maria?
Well, thanks for having me on the show, Karen, and thanks for sharing this space with me, Brian. And I'm looking forward to working with Brian and with Patricia, and unraveling hopefully some mysteries. And I just really love ancient sites, and I really love going to different places. So for me, it's always a wonder wherever I go around the world, and what I experience is it's always truly amazing.
Can I just ask one thing? Because obviously a lot of people will know who you are anyway, but just explain in a few seconds. I'll get Brian to do the same. What are the things you're into? Because I don't know if everybody knows all the things that you're into. So Maria, you first. Like, you don't just do dowsing, and you don't just do this. So just say in a few words the things that you do and your readings.
Well, people can find out more about me at esotericcollege.com to have a look at the courses that I do. Some are offered online, some are private one-to-one Skypes, and some are practical. And you can find out about the kind of tour sites that I do at theaveryexperience.com.
Here.
.co.uk actually. Sorry, Karen, I had a coughing fit. It's actually theaveryexperience.co.uk. I'm so sorry.
That's okay. But what are the kind of things that you do, Maria? You do dowsing?
Yeah, I do dowsing. I do astrology, and I a tarot card reader. I was taught the Romany way when I was 6.
Maria?
Hello.
You back?
I'm so sorry about this, Karen. I'm so sorry.
That's okay. We'll finish in a minute because we've been going nearly an hour anyway. But just finish off what you were saying.
Well, I think what I was finishing off saying was you can find out more about me and my courses at esotericcollege.com, and I do courses on tarot, past life regression, dowsing, and also, I am a druid. So I teach druid courses, which is called Living Druidry. And my tours, local and other, you can find out about me at theaveryexperience.co.uk.
Hey, what about you, Brian? Because you don't just look at pyramids. You do elongated headed people. You do other tours. You're doing other research. Carry on.
Well, basically, I'm focused on the Paracas elongated skulls of Peru. We have ongoing DNA testing happening now, and then I get the pleasure to go to ancient sites in different parts of the world. I'm kind of focusing my energies on South America and Mexico and Easter Island and Egypt, Jordan, soon Israel, and expanding more into the Middle Eastern area. We've had requests to go to places like India, but I'm not really all that intrigued with there or Southeast Asia anymore. So I'm kind of focusing my energy on specific parts of the world. We do a yearly trip of Egypt, and of course, flying from Peru to Egypt is quite the quest. So when you're in an area like that, it always makes sense to have a little side tour somewhere. So in March of next year, we're going to Israel because there's megalithic evidence in a tunnel under Temple Mount that is accessible. So I'm really looking forward to that. And other than that, I get to spend quite a bit of time at home, which is wonderful too. So all the stuff that I film, it gives me lots of time to be able to make YouTube videos. So I'm working on one actually from April of our trip to Petra in Jordan, where we spent the entire day walking 12 kilometers from the beginning to the end of it. It's a much bigger site than what most people realize. It's absolutely monumental in scale, with plenty of evidence of ancient machining technology involved. So that's actually a video that's uploading right now.
Hey, look forward to seeing that then. Patricia, do you want to say anything? She's been very quiet listening.
Yeah, I just love everything you've been saying. I'm really fascinated. I did have a question, but it'll do for next time, because I think it's a bit silly myself, but not so much a question, but just something I'd think. Anyway, I'll stop waffling. It's always lovely to hear you, Maria. It's a shame you're on the phone and stuff. I just love you two. Just, I don't know, you're just amazing. Both of you, you're just amazing.
Thank you.
Thank you, Patricia.
Yeah, because you're doing it. You're actually doing it. We're just listening.
Yeah.
And I'd so very much appreciate both of you spending this time talking to us, especially, and Brian as well, because, you know, you're such a, what do you call it, a big person compared on YouTube. He is, Maria.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, so congratulations. Anyway, it's been a pleasure. We'll say goodbye when I stop the button, but just for the recording, we say goodbye together, and then we'll all say goodbye off when I've pressed the button off, yeah? So don't just disappear. We'll say goodbye off air, sort of thing. Anyway,
Okay.
for the recording, bye everybody, and thank you so much. That was wonderful. I'm so pleased for you, Maria.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye, everyone. Love you
Cheers.
all.
Yay, thank you.